Welcome to the inaugural FrankTalk Radio Dialogue, an initiative by the Steve Biko Foundation with the aim to increase public education about the Bill of Rights by engaging with young professionals in national discourse. I'm your host this evening, Faith Morobe, and we're broadcasting live from the YFM studios. Now, as September marks the month of heritage, as well as the 35th anniversary of Steve Biko's killing, one must discuss and one must actually get into the topic of discussion for this evening, and this one is called Heritage, Culture and Identity. I'd like to welcome my panelists, first of all, Kagiso Media CEO, Mr. Murphy Morobe, as well as multi-award winning songstress, Simphiwe. Thank you very much for joining me this evening. Now, if you'd like to be a part of this evening's discussions, please do feel free to drop us a tweet, send us an email, or simply give us a call on 011-772-0992. Now, we kick off this evening's dialogue with an address by Mr. Murphy Morobe, who will be speaking about the changing nature of heritage, culture, and identity. Mr. Morobe, over to you.
Thank you very much to you and the listeners. When I was asked to make some comments, and I thought quite careful about this whole issue of culture and identity. And I was always fascinated by how, over time, as human beings, we are always susceptible to influence and change. And it's always been a measure of how well we are doing, the way in which we relate to the change that society imposes on you, both internally and externally. And I've come to experience the fact that your ability to adapt will always be a measure of how your own values and your culture can survive. Even more so today, in a very dramatically changing socio-political environment, especially given the context of media, the way media in fact breaches the divide, the gaps, it crosses boundaries, it crosses oceans, it connects people in remote islands with people in the deepest of valleys. So to actually conceive of culture as something static is, in my view, something that is detrimental to your own potential for future development. Now, when I was a young man and I came across the insights of someone like Steve Biko in the early 70s, and it was clear to me at the time that, I was a great reader of the Time magazine, following the Vietnam War, following the student protests at the time. And then we had the formation of the South African Student Organization at the same time as there was huge, significant student protests in different parts of the world. And you got to see how an idea of peace became a central tenet around which students across the globe were able to mobilize. And it was peace spoken about in different languages, peace expressed in different cultures and in different contexts. So when Steve Biko wrote what he wrote as he liked, he found us as young people with receptive minds. We were students, we're inquiring, we're always curious about what the real situation is in our country. The most favorite part of our visit to the Orlando Library was a section in the library that had what is referred to the African Writers Series. That's where we got the embrace of ideas from people like Chinua Achebe, Bessie Head, etc. And those for us coming out of an apartheid environment, which was constructed and designed to deny us the privilege and, in fact, the prospect of a better life. We found in those books insights as young people at the time, because we were hungry for knowledge, that really shaped our perspective, got us to understand better our society. And when, in fact, we face ourselves as students at high school with the issue of Afrikaans being imposed as a medium of instruction, and thanks to those insights of influences, these were writers from across Africa, these were writers from North Africa, West Africa, transposing their experiences of a phenomenon that we are also going through in South Africa called colonialism, or at least in our context also referred to as post-colonialism. But the elements in terms of which it manifested itself in our lives was exactly the same as what happened at the time when Ghana got its independence, etc. So in a way, I actually think it's always important to accept that even as we have a very strong cultural belief system, to be able to subsist in this world today, open yourself for other experiences, because after all, we are all human. Even as I might be coming from a little village, there are experiences in other villages that are exactly the same as mine.
Just to our panelists, as well as to the audience, that if you would like to ask our guests any questions or make any comments, please do feel free to do so. We'll be doing so during the course of this evening's progression as well as show. I'm going to call upon Simphiwe Dana, and you will be giving a talk on culture, language, and socio-economic development. Interesting stuff. Please take it.
Good evening to the listeners of FM, and good evening to everyone in the audience. Thank you for giving me this opportunity to dazzle you with my mind. Okay, so I was given a brief. The brief said the link between culture, language, religion, and socio-economic development. I've chosen not to include religion because I'm going to be speaking on this based on the South African context, and when it comes to us, culture and religion are usually synonymous. So let me begin. I've written a few articles on language and its socio-economic value. My belief is that cultural and religious identity stem from language. There are, of course, incorporated religions that fall outside of this scope. Christianity in Africa, a case in point. In my submission to Parliament on the Languages Bill, I cited African innovation systems and their relation to economic progress. Is there a link between respecting, upholding, and constitutionalizing linguistic, cultural, and religious freedoms and an economically progressive society for all its people? The question whose answer I personally am searching for is, why are African countries crumbling post-colonialism? It is not like the corruption and looting is new. Colonialism, by definition, is corruption, looting, and a heavy dose of oppression. I have made favorite this excerpt from a research paper by the Department of Linguistics in the Norwegian University of Science and Technology. If development is seen as a sustainable, socio-cultural, economic, and technological transformation of society, then language is important. Language is a granary, a repository of the worldview of its speakers. Exploring Africa explains a worldview as a system of values, attitudes, and beliefs, which provide people with a mechanism to understand the world in which they live and interpret everyday events and occurrences. In lay words, people thrive when their development is located within their natural environment. Why are African countries crumbling post-colonialism? South Africa is only comparable with countries at war in violence and poor education, while it is still business as usual at the Johannesburg Stock Exchange. The Marikana incident in South Africa also speaks volumes. We need to snap out of apartheid mode. What have we changed about the apartheid system of governance, except on a cosmetic level? It seems we are doing everything we can to maintain colonialism. Between 1953 and 1976, the apartheid government slowly phased in mother tongue education, and for 8 years in a learner's life, they were taught in their mother tongue. This improved the matric pass rate significantly. The abolishment of mother tongue education is what led to the Soweto uprising. Thereafter, the pass rate dropped to as low as 44%. This is taken from a research paper by a lady whose surname is Huey. That's all I got here. Today, the pass rate is 30%, and still many fail. Judging by our education statistics, it seems indeed cultural and linguistic freedom is relevant to economic growth and social development. If we do not review our cosmetic attitude towards the implementation of these freedoms, we are relegating scores of children, especially those from rural areas, informal settlements, and some townships, to cheap labor, remembering that the majority of South Africans live in these areas. What economy and for who? Thank you.
You know, I'm going to just pick up from what you've just spoken about, Simphiwe, and I think the most fitting question to ask you at this particular moment in time is that you mentioned the fact that cultural linguistics and as well as religious freedoms are relevant to economic growth and social development. I'd like to know how so?
Okay. Firstly, we have to understand that we have to educate our children so that tomorrow they can be ready for the job market and be able to uphold our economy, right? And from the studies, it seems that the reason why there's a huge failure in education in this country is because, like I said, the majority of our people are in the rural areas, and it seems that with most of them, the issue of language and location of information is a problem. They can't access it easily. And that then means that a whole lot of our people are left outside the economic gravy train.
Okay, Mr. Morobe, I'm going to ask you this question. What is your understanding of cultural, linguistic, as well as religious freedom? I mean, we were speaking about the changing nature a little bit earlier on, but for you personally, what does that mean to you?
I think the issue of cultural, religious, and linguistic freedom arises precisely because there would be instances where people are deprived of such. Now, if you believe that we all have the right to express and to practice our cultural beliefs, to believe in whatever we like to believe, now that goes only up to the extent that someone else, another force, comes and deprives you of that. And once they do that, they would know that these aspects are very important for communities and societies. And usually it's what binds groups of people together, because through that they're able to develop their sense of identity, either to those cultural beliefs or the religious beliefs. Now, in a context where, when one talks about colonialism, which in fact was a manifestation of the evolution of the trading system, which actually got the colonial countries to move in search of markets. And when they go to the other countries, they then have to impose their will in order to have access to the resources. And once they do that, the only way they can keep the locals in a state of subservience to them is to utilize these instruments that could weaken their resolve. And in many instances, in fact, there's a lot of research on this subject. You know, you impose your religion on the locals. You impose your language preferences, you impose your cultural preferences on them. You make us begin to talk like the English, you make us believe that whatever is white or European is something to aspire to. You begin to define the context for us. So I think for me, therefore, religious, cultural, and linguistic freedom is very important for any society to actually have the sense and the right to express themselves.
I think with that, I'm going to actually pose this question to you as the listener. What can today's youth learn from Biko about the importance of culture, the importance of heritage, and the importance of identity? If you do have a question or a comment, please do feel free to give us a ring, 011 772 0992. Now, you know, we're mentioning various issues, and, you know, Mr. Morobe, in 1976, when students rejected Afrikaans as the medium of instruction, to what extent was the protest about linguistic freedom and or even issues of identity?
We understood that at the time, what we used to say, in fact, is that the oppressor wants us to speak his language. And therefore, once they deprive us of the right to speak our languages, it is a subjugation that is extremely, extremely, permanent. So as young people, we understood that, and therefore when we resisted, it was not so much about Afrikaans as a language per se at the time. It was our understanding of how the language is being used as a political instrument for subjugation. As a matter of fact, even at high school at the time, I actually did better in Afrikaans than in Zulu. And I still speak Afrikaans right now. Even in my home where I grew up, my uncle was a minister of religion in church. He preached in Afrikaans, but of course he came from Potchefstroom. So, in Potchefstroom, mensen praat Afrikaans. So, in that way, I grew up in that kind of influence. So, I could understand that you don't judge a person by the language. You look for what the intent and the motive of that communication is and deal with those issues on principle. And for me, that's really what's always influenced my perspective on the subject.
I'm going to take a quick break. When we come back, more with Mr. Morobe as well as Simphiwe Dana. Stay with us.